Hi, my name is Susanna Barton. I'm the founder of the Grand Plans online community. And today we have in the studio Carolyn McClanahan. She is the founder of Life Planning Partners here in Jacksonville, Florida. And we're going to talk all about the nuances and all the good tips on financial planning for our senior year strolls. Hi, my name is Susanna Barton. I'm the founder of the Grand Plans online community. And this is episode 5 of the Grand Plans podcast. And today we are so grateful to have Carolyn McClanahan in the Fifths production studio with us today. She is a financial planner and the founder of Life Planning Partners.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I was going to flip it all around, so George, you'll have to probably cut that back. But Life Planning Partners. So thank you for being with us today. And what a unique background you bring to this conversation, a former doctor and now a financial planner. Mm-hmm. And so before we get into me jumping on you, asking you, how does this all work financially? Tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to be in this field.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. You're doing great things here. So I started out as a physician. I was primary care and emergency medicine physician. And I love being a doctor. In fact, I actually still volunteer as a doctor, so it's not former doctor, believe it or not. I still keep my license and my board active. But my husband and I tried to find a financial planner back in 2000 because he wanted to change careers. He was an engineer and he wanted to be a track coach and a photographer. And I said, I don't want to support you, so we got to make sure we make this work.
Right.
And we interviewed planners, but they were mostly about just doing investments. And so I went back to school for fun to learn about financial planning, and I just fell in love with it and decided to make a career change. And through that career, though, and so I opened my firm in 2004, I started seeing all these intersections of health and finance, and about how if people didn't plan appropriately for the health things, then that could really hurt them financially. And so the end of life planning, chronic illness planning, planning for things like dementia, there's just so many intersections of health and finance. So I speak around the country now on all those intersections of health and finance, and I write articles for a number of organizations.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that it is quite an intersection of two very important things. And as I've been having these conversations and looking at the bigger picture here with this planning, it seems like there are kind of 4 main parts to the plan. It's the communication, the healthcare conversation and medical planning and thinking, the legal bits of it, and then the financial piece, which in my mind is the biggest piece of the puzzle, because you can't chug down the road to your sunset stroll without some gas in the tank. And so tell me, is there, you have clients, where do you start? And is there a first step to thinking through this, and or is there an average cost or amount that everyone needs to at least start with to at least
to know where to go? So it actually, all those 4 things you talked about, they're all important. They all go together. And what I tell people, when you're planning for aging, planning for long-term care costs, you can only control what you can control. So you have to focus on that. And the most important thing is, I call it the big 4 of aging. Where do people run into the most financial trouble? And the first is not thinking through living situations far enough in advance. And I can get in a little bit more detail about all this. Not planning what their healthcare decisions are. And so, for example, a lot of people, especially as they hit the end of life, they have one thing after another, and before you know it, they have no quality of life. But nobody ever talked about advanced directive planning. And so so much is being done that where comfort care and things like hospice and palliative care would be much better. And then the third is, when do you turn over financial decision making? Because an elder's biggest risk to their finances is actually themselves, because it's harder to make complex financial decisions. As you age, it's easier to be taken advantage of. And so learning when to turn over and get help with financial decision making. And then the last one is when to quit driving. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people, but but as you get older, if you're still driving and you shouldn't be, that can be a significant expense, especially if you start having wrecks and things like that. So by thinking through in advance how you're going to deal with those situations when you're older, you can greatly mitigate the cost.
Now, are you having these conversations with your clients in this kind of big picture realm, where you're not just talking about where to invest your money or how, but all the other pieces that are involved in that situation?
So that's the difference to me between, when people think about a financial planner, a lot of people just think about investments, but it's changed so much. It's really a new profession now.
And maybe bigger because people had pensions maybe 3 or 4 decades ago.
Yep.
That was more the thing, and people didn't worry about it as much. But now it's
now you got to put, with 401ks, people are supposed to be saving for their future. There's so much more to financial planning than just investments. And so, a good financial planner is going to do a comprehensive plan for you, looking at how much you spend and how much you bring in, how much you're saving, to make certain you're saving appropriately, not just for aging, but for any bad thing that can pop up. And so when you do that initial financial plan, I hate the word retirement.
Yeah.
Retirement was invented in the 1930s with Social Security. Back then, people worked until they died.
Right.
And now, they picked age 65 back in the 1930s. That was average life expectancy. Now people live into their late 80s, early 90s. Some people live to 100 now. And so we weren't meant to live 30 years in retirement. And so the way I like to call financial planning more about transition planning,
right?
About when you're going to cut back at work, because ideally people should be working longer. But getting back to the thing at hand is one of the things that we do in comprehensive planning is, and I start this usually when people are in their 50s, is going through the pre-planning for aging. So going through what their living situation is. So for example, I'm in my 50s, right? And we're getting ready to remodel a bathroom. And I actually am getting a consultant basically to come in, help me make that bathroom aging friendly, but not for looking like I'm a really old person yet. So like if something ever happens, because we'd like to age in place. So if something happens in our 70s or 80s, it's going to be easy to modify that bathroom so that we can still remain in the home.
Right.
So thinking through all that in advance, some people make a home change when they retire. When you buy that new home, make sure it's an aging friendly home so you can stay home as long as possible. So that's one scenario. And then the other thing is, there comes a point, there's a break-even cost of when is it safe and cost-effective to stay at home versus moving into a facility.
Yes, and I think this is the big question on that many people have to address. Most people have to address.
Right.
They want to live at home. I want to age in place, but maybe haven't done the cost comparison to see what their resources are and how that might be better served by going to a community or assisted living facility, that kind of thing.
That's correct.
So is there an obvious differentiator between the two cost-wise?
Well, you have to look at what your resources are to begin with. So first off, if you're in an aging-friendly home, then that's a big part of it. Because if you have, a 3-story home with skinny stairs, that's a no-go for aging in place at that place.
Right.
And then you have to look at who's going to help you.
The care.
And, yes. Right. And so creating family agreements, ideally you're going to hopefully you have family that cares about you, that at least is going to look in on you. But don't just throw it on them. Talk about this in advance. And again, do it when everybody's well, when you're in your 50s, 60s. Then that's when you need to be having the conversation of when you're old, how are we going to work as a family to make sure that we're going to be okay?
You are speaking my language, my friend.
Yeah.
This is it.
And the other thing you have to do with that is also talk about what consideration is going to be given to those family members that are taking care of you. One of the huge family fights you see is basically, and it's usually a daughter, is just thrown to all of a sudden being responsible for their parents. And the wills and everything's split equally between all children, when potentially one child gave up a significant part of their life and earnings to take care of their parents. So planning that out in advance, having family agreements in advance, that will greatly reduce the cost and allow you to stay at home longer. And if you have the resources, look at what it's going to cost to be able to bring people in the home. Now, there's a great website. It's the Genworth Cost of Care website. I don't know if you've seen that. Yeah. And you can you can figure out what's the break even. So for example, I think in Jacksonville, I haven't looked recently, but so to have somebody for home care is about $26 an hour.
Yes, it's expensive. Right. And if it's 24/7 for an extended period of time, that's
way more than going to a facility.
Yeah.
And so you can look at the break-even cost of of assisted living, because there's different steps. You have assisted living where you can still do things on your own. You need minimal care, but you just need supervision to make sure somebody's looking out for you, versus skilled care.
Right.
And so the cost of assisted living may be $4,000 to $5,000 a month just to live in a place. And then if you need people to come in to help you may have to pay more. Skilled care is when you really can't take care of yourself. That cost is, significantly more. And so you have to look at what's the break even of that hourly cost versus the assisted living cost.
Is this something you're sitting down with your clients and helping them to analyze?
Yes.
It's a lot of numbers. I'm not a math person. The numbers freak me out a little bit, but some of this is obvious, when you're looking at big numbers, but are you coaching your clients through these transitions?
I'm helping them make that decision and agreeing to in advance, because nobody wants to leave home.
Right.
And the thing is, though, there comes a point where it's either cost prohibitive to keep them at home or it's unsafe.
And how do you plan for that, though, in advance? Because, you don't want to get to that point where now you have to go into the home, or you have to do something that you didn't really want to do in the first place. And I've heard of couples even, deciding ahead of time, we're not going to be faced with that decision, so we're just going to sign up now or move into a community where it has
continuing care community. So planning that decision out in advance makes it a lot easier. So my husband is a track coach. And one of the things he says in track is perfect practice makes perfect. And that really hit me, because I was thinking about, because I went through these situations with clients early on in my career, and it's like, man, how can I prevent these disasters?
Yeah.
And then, so I thought, well, if we can get them to think through the scenario, when the time comes that they actually have to make that decision, having thought through it and thinking about where they're going to go actually makes the decision a little easier. And so we actually talk about it every few years with clients of, are you still okay with this plan? And as people get closer to the age where something could happen, we actually encourage them to go to assisted living facilities and nursing homes, just to say, if I have to go, where am I going to go? And that brings, again, familiarity brings comfort.
Right.
And so if you've already visited, it may not be your ideal, but if you're going to go there, that it's at least a decent place to go to. And so by thinking through this in advance and then agreeing in advance, what's the trigger? And so when you're analyzing your finances, is it at a certain price point where it just cost prohibitive? And so it depends on it. I just put together a talk I'm doing in San Francisco in May, and I looked don't get old in San Francisco. It's so hugely expensive. And so the break-even cost there of home care versus assisted living is only about 6 hours a day of home care.
Okay.
And then it's cheaper to go into assisted living. And, here I want to say the last time I looked at it, it was about 10 to 12 hours a day.
Okay.
And then assisted living ends up being cheaper. And so, but the other thing that is really important is safety. There's two tracks to me to getting old. You maintain your brain, but you become frail. And so it's harder to take care of you. And a lot of times people can do well into the very end with just that situation. But once you have somebody who has significant cognitive decline that truly needs 24/7 supervision, it's just not feasible from both a caregiver safety standpoint and a patient safety standpoint. So agreeing in advance, if I have no clue who I am anymore, do I really need to be at home when it's not good or safe for anybody?
You're right. And how does that impact other people?
Right.
took over some care management for an older couple in South Florida, and there was no planning and no previous conversation about it, and they didn't have any family, and it got real expensive real fast and didn't look like it was going to end anytime soon, because I think sometimes it's the better care that someone gets if you start getting the 24-hour care, then your life improves, and so you're living longer, but yet your costs are
it gets expensive.
Yeah, it gets expensive real quick. So obviously the care column is a big one for in terms of costs. What are the other big buckets that you're talking to clients about?
Well, the other thing is and this is a hard conversation, is the healthcare decisions. So my favorite advanced directive is called Prepare for Your Care.
Okay.
You can Google that if you've never seen it before. And the reason I like it is because it makes you document what's important to you about quality of life.
Okay.
And one reason care gets so expensive is because we keep people going way longer than they would want to be kept going if they knew what was going on, or especially what was ahead. And so at some point you have to pivot to palliative care or hospice. And if people do a better job documenting what their quality of life wishes are and say, if I can't do this anymore, put me in comfort care. So my husband and I, if something ever happens to me, he has one question he has to ask the doctor.
What's that?
Will Carolyn ever be able to wipe her butt again?
Yeah.
And I know that sounds...
yes, that's exactly, that nailed it. Yeah.
Right. And the reason why that's important to me is if I can never wipe my rear end again, that means my brain will no longer work. I love my brain. So if my brain's not working and know to wipe my butt, let me go. Put me in hospice. The other thing is, and this would be controversial for a lot of people, that means I've lost the ability to use both my hands, which would be a quadriplegia. And there are many wonderfully high-functioning people with quadriplegia, but they have better constitution than I have. I'm very physically active, and I've taken care of quadriplegic patients. And so I said to my husband, because I'm a big cyclist, and so that's a big risk factor, especially in Jacksonville, of having a bike accident. I said, if that ever happens and I'm quadriplegic, I want you guys unhooking me from everything as soon as possible. Yeah. That's my choice. And some people might argue against that. And when you're very old, if you get dementia, they call pneumonia the old man's friend. That was the name for it before. Now, nursing homes don't like you to die in the nursing home, so they treat you for everything. So you need a good patient advocate that if he gets sick, and he's had this quality of life directive that says, I don't want to be kept going if I can no longer communicate with people ever again. Well, then you keep them comfortable and let the person die. And we don't do enough of that, of standing up for our rights as patients to make sure that the medical system doesn't keep us going past when we want to.
Well, I don't know if this is a dark part of another conversation on the medical side of things, but is it worth it to talk about how much medical care you'll stand for? Or pay for, if I get sick and I feel like I'm not contributing physically, mentally, otherwise, and my husband and I have talked about this, I don't really want to go to the doctor anymore. Or
you can make that decision.
Yeah.
And the key is often, and that's where it's really important. And so getting back to ways to control costs, is people don't convey their wishes to their family well enough. You need to make sure whoever you're naming as your healthcare surrogate is really going to stand up for you. A lot of times spouses name each other, but then when push comes to shove, they don't want to let their spouse die or their children. And so you have to make sure that whoever is going to be making that decision is that you've conveyed your wishes and they're going to stand up for your wishes. Also, make sure your entire family and your medical team know your wishes so that they can't push back. It's so funny. I wrote my advanced directives in an article on Forbes years ago. And I said, I'm putting these in an article in the public so that if people try to keep me alive, you guys, my audience out there, remind everybody, here's what her wishes were.
Yeah. Talking about it is one of the biggest parts, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, the one big thing everyone asks about is the long-term care insurance and whether it's worth it or not. Am I better off to suck my money away and save it for a rainy day, or is it better to make that investment because it's expensive?
It's very expensive.
And see what happens.
Yeah, it's very tough. The long-term care insurance that you could buy back like in the 2000s, early 2000s, was a fantastic deal, and people did not know the deal they were getting. And now it's priced more appropriately because, back then the insurers didn't really know what they were getting into as far as longevity and cost. And so now it is very expensive. And there's two types of policies, though. There are the reimbursement policies where you're paying this big chunk of money every year, and then when you actually claim, they'll pay like $3,000 a month or $5,000, whatever you bought. They reimburse along the way. And with those policies, though, if you die, you get nothing. And so people have a hard time putting a big chunk of change into a long-term care policy that they're going to get nothing back.
Right.
And now those are really expensive. Now there's another type of policy. They're hybrid policies, hybrid life long-term care.
Okay.
The benefits of those are, as far as the actual long-term care, is not as rich, but somebody's going to get something back. So if it's used for long-term care, then it reduces the death benefit. If you don't use any of it, then your family gets the life insurance at the end. It's not a lot of life insurance, and so it's not all use it or lose it, but the benefits aren't as rich as the traditional long-term care policies. Right. And what I tell people, and with those, it's better to buy like a lump sum. Like you can put $50,000, but now you have this policy that's never going to go away, or $100,000. It just depends on what you want that benefit to be. Now, they work basically the same as putting your money in a savings account, but depending on when you end up using it. So let's say that you buy it in your late 50s, and then you have a stroke 5 years later. Like if you put $100,000, and I know somebody that just did this, so I can use these numbers. If they put $100,000 in the policy, in a few years, that benefit's going to be worth like $328,000. So if you use it in 5 or 6 years, you're like, yay, I did great. Right. But if you don't end up using it till like your 80s or 90s, you'll have done better putting it in basically bonds.
Right.
Right. So that's what insurance is about, though. Right. And so my answer is, should you have long-term care insurance? Here's the problem that I see is a lot of times when people don't have money segregated for long-term care, the family is reluctant to spend that money, because that's their inheritance going, you know. And I've seen families fight over that. Oh, you're spending a lot of money on mom's care. It's like, well, it's mom's money. But, everybody knows what's going on. And so to have a bucket segregated is another nice benefit. For me, it just depends on where you are with your ability to pay for care.
Okay.
Whether you should buy a long-term care policy. Yeah.
It's just, again, you can't predict what's going to happen. No. But it's just, it's a lot to think about. Yeah. And you want to do the right thing, but it's hard to know.
No, it's very hard to know. And that's where having family conversations along the way, making certain that you're controlling what you can control, which is making certain you've planned out the living situation, who's going to provide the care, that you've done good advance directives so your family's not trying to keep you going long past when you want to go by, and making certain also that you're getting help with the finances, that what your resources are going to be if you need long-term care. For example, some people have, most everybody's going to have Social Security. Right. Some people still have pensions. Yeah. So when you actually take into account that Social Security, if they have a pension, that does cover a nice chunk of long-term care. If somebody's single, it's much easier because you don't have to worry about the spouse being left decimated. So if somebody's already single, it's like, are they willing to spend down those assets? Because once they spend down those assets, they can go on Medicaid. Right. But if you're a couple, that's where it gets real dicey because you got to worry about the surviving spouse.
When's the best time to start having all of this conversation and the financial planning? Is it in your 40s, 50s. When's it too late? When
it's never too late.
Yeah.
So financial planning to me we should be teaching it in grade school.
Mm-hmm.
And basic finance and personal finance, and younger adults should be learning the basics of how to save. Mm-hmm. And I no longer focus. I actually have a new talk I started last year. It's called "Are You Happy Now?"
Okay.
And because to me, the focus on financial planning has been too much on just planning for an uncertain future, when we need to spend more time making certain people are happy in the present and using their money wisely, because too many people they just waste money and they're not thinking about it. So using money wisely now, and that you're saving for the future for whatever it throws at you.
Okay.
And so my dream for everybody is that they work until they can't at jobs that they love, but don't work as hard, and that you live fully throughout your life.
Yeah.
And then that way, I did this study on, and Daniel Pink did the Great Regret study of what, how many people feel regret. And I think it was 22% of people felt regret all the time, which is sad.
Yeah.
And because as a doctor, the people who I looked at who had good deaths, for lack of a better term, and who had bad deaths. And it seems like the people who lived in regret really had the horrible deaths and were trying to hang on longer, and it's like, I don't want to die, and and everybody's in disarray. Whereas people who live thoughtfully throughout their life, and they were happy when that time actually came, they did it with peace, and which actually ends up costing less. You hate putting a dollar figure on that, but it's just a fact.
Right. Yeah. And Medicare, Medicaid, and also the question that a lot of people ask is, where's that balance where you're getting in to, say, your health is somewhat in decline, or you're getting older, your resources aren't that much, and you want to go into an assisted living facility or a community, continuing care community, where you can get in, and then Medicaid takes over when your money runs out? Or is this?
So let me give that in a big picture.
Yeah, and I know it's probably called something. I just don't know what that is.
So first off, there's continuing care retirement communities is where it's all the stepped care.
Right.
You have to get in those when you're healthy.
Yes.
Because they want to know that you're going to be paying them for a long period of time, so that when they have to provide that skilled care and the assisted living and all that they've made their money.
So can you get into a continuing care community when you're healthy and have some resources enough to pay for, say, a year or two? Will Medicaid eventually kick in to pay for it?
Well, with the continuing care community, they have to take you long. They want to see that you have more than 1 or 2 years of resources.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's one option. But the other option is if you're trying to age in place and you're going to assisted living facility. Yes, they like to see that you have at least 2 years worth of being able to pay for it to be able to get the facility you want. If you're getting ready to run out of money and you need to go on Medicare quickly, Medicaid, excuse me, and you need to go on Medicaid quickly, then it's going to limit your choices of facility. So I always tell people, at least if you're trying to save for long-term care, you don't get long-term care insurance, make sure that you have 2 years worth of long-term care costs segregated in your mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's very helpful.
Yeah, and then that way that you can get into the facility. The average facility stay is about, I want to say, 2.8 years. And so, people think they're going to live forever in a long-term care facility, and that's not necessarily true.
Right.
Yeah, and so Medicare does not cover long-term care. It covers skilled care. And so, it covers the first 100 days of skilled care, but after that, forget it. And so Medicaid planning, you have to start that well in advance or plan to spend down your money so you can get on Medicaid.
So, and that is true. Once you spend down your money and you've gotten into a place with 2 years worth of resources, you spend down, and then Medicaid would come in and fulfill your existence.
Now here's an issue though, so I hate throwing flies in the ointment. So most facilities, if you've come in and you've paid and you go on Medicaid, they're going to keep you, but I think the facilities are being challenged now. A lot of them are losing money. The cost of the employees is going up and up. That they'll do anything they can to get rid of Medicaid patients.
Okay.
Yeah. So if I know. And so
how does that work? How do they get rid of you?
Well, so let's say you go in the hospital and you don't have a bed hold agreement, then they can give your bed to somebody else.
Okay.
Yeah. It's sad.
Yeah, it's sad.
We need a whole revamping of the whole long-term care industry.
Well, and I was going to say, I feel like now with such a growth in this, in our age group, and also, the ones ahead of us, I mean, there's such a need everywhere for all of these services.
Yep.
And that's scary, but also good to talk about it earlier. Do you feel like people are more prepared now than they have been, or at least willing to talk about it more?
Oh, no, I definitely think people are talking about it more. I think, though, society is less prepared than in the past because, families are so dispersed, and it's hard for people to look out for each other. I think with social media and the internet, people have become less connected in their community. Actually, I love that you're doing this because it's actually bringing a connection in the community. But like we had a block party on our street when we first moved in because we had a street party because we didn't know a lot of our neighbors, and this was 25 years ago actually, and it was the first time some of our neighbors had seen each other in decades.
Yeah.
And now we have regular ones because it's like we are childless, so we're going to be solo agers, and so it's like we want to know our neighbors. So like if I don't come out of my house for 5 days, hopefully somebody goes by and smells the stench and finds out I'm dead. Right.
Yeah. So no, community, that's another
community's so important.
Big thing.
Yeah.
Well, so much to think about, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share all of your knowledge and expertise in so many different fields. It's quite a strength, and so thank you for being a resource to our listeners. And
my pleasure. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah. Thanks. All right. Thanks for being with us today. Thank you, Carolyn. Hi, thank you for being with us today during episode 5 of the Grand Plans podcast. You can find it on our YouTube channel, Instagram, and Facebook. So look for it there. And again, a big thank you to Carolyn McClanahan for being with us in the studio today.